Oh, good morning, everyone.
Hello.
Just gonna wait for a couple of people just to come in and then we'll get started shortly. Just give it a few seconds. I hope you're all well. I think we'll get going. So very good morning to you all and welcome to another Tick Tribe Community Masterclass. My name is Tarisiro and I will be your host again this morning. So over the last couple of months, we've been focusing on the Founders Toolkit, where entrepreneurs such as yourselves can gain skills and knowledge from various industry experts and some of our partners, so AWS, Estonia's e-residency, and of course, TypeDev. And they're all dedicated to supporting the growth of entrepreneurship in Africa. And this morning is no different. Of course, we are joined by Bruce Leo, and he's the Senior Digital Strategist at TypeDev, and he's going to talk to us about strategic product design. Now, what does strategic product design mean? Well, it's the blend of theory and practice to teach you strategic decision-making, problem identification, and product validation. So basically, how can you materialize that game-changing idea you have and transform it into a product that you can build a business around? Or for those of you who have an already established a product, how can you stay focused on innovation and set a fundamental structure to roadmap decisions? So please let us know what you think. If you've got any questions for Bruce, you're welcome to pop them into the chat and we'll answer them at the very end in the Q&A part of our session at the end. So I'm very excited about this class. I don't want to take any more of your time and let's dive right into it. And I'll hand over to Bruce, who is going to talk to us about strategic brand design. So welcome, Bruce.
Great. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation about product design, specifically looking at the strategic part of your product design. So just to give a brief introduction to myself, this is me, a photo taken of me, and this is a quick description copied from our company's profile. Makes it easier when you just copy somebody else's description. Yes, I graduated my master's in text analysis and I'm busy doing my PhD in accelerating startups itself. I have a couple of years of experience at Tuxovation, which is an incubation hub in South Africa. And now I'm connecting with some startups, incubation hubs in Vienna. So yes, that's a brief introduction of myself. Next slide, please. So today I'll be presenting on behalf of TypeDev, which I am very happy to announce. We are starting our branch in Vienna, so technically we are considered a startup this side as well. So walking through this journey with you guys as we are presenting. Screen's off. Yeah. Okay. So we are a software development house, mostly doing mobile apps, websites, and all that type of things for our clients. We recently signed a contract with a blockchain client, which is looking to do a off-chain artificial intelligence, which is really cool. So we have skills across the border, including design skills. And a lot of this makes sense because our staff members are in South Africa. Our branch is in Vienna, so I am here. So yes, talking about startups today. And that's a bit of background about TypeDev. Let's move on. So we know that when startups try to start up, there's a lot of them that fail. But how many of them actually fail? I was sitting in a conference a couple of weeks ago, and one of the presenters spoke to us, and she said something that was so amazing that made me really think, you know, what is causing all of this? So she says there is 137,000 startups that are created every single day. Multiply it by 2 and you get the University of Vienna's population. So all of the staff included, all of the workers that are there, and you have that amount of startups that is created every day. And in each of the startups, they're not just one person. They can be 2 or 3 or 4. So you can see the vast amount of startups that are created every day in the world. Every day. So yesterday until today, 137,000. Imagine that. So out of these 137,000, how many of them succeed? How many of them fail? 120,000 of these startups fail every day. Businesses close down. So from that percentage, you can see that there is only 14% of startups that actually succeed to grow in the market. So what makes this 14% of startups succeed? And what makes the rest of these startups fail? Once more. What is the strategy that these startups take, this 14% of them take, in order for them to succeed? Is it because of their finances? Is it because of their networking? Is it because they have the knowledge? Is it because of the latest technology? Is it because they have a large amount of funding? And what causes the rest of the startups to fail? Is it because they're missing one of these things? Is it because they have political issues inside the startups? Is it because maybe they don't have enough networking or enough funding from the government or from investors and so on? So today we're actually not going to dig into too much of that. We're going to look more at the product design itself. So I like this quote from Sun Tzu. He wrote the book, The Art of War. And he was a very grounded and stable person. He thought through a lot of the decisions that he had. Although the book was written about war itself, but the strategy practice is taken into businesses day after day. And one of the statements he says is, strategy without tactics is a slow route to victory. And tactics without strategy is a noise before defeat. And we've seen this over and over again, where startups try to dig for the latest type of technologies. And again, they fabricate possible ideas about what their product can do. They talk about all these great things that they can integrate into their product. And at the end of the day, nothing is ever created. And that's what we can say as a good noise before defeat. So it's important to understand that there needs to be a good strategy in place for your startup to carry it out. As we can see, strategy itself is more about where you're heading towards, and tactics is about how do you get there as quick as you can. So, for example, go back. For example, chess has a very straightforward, defined strategy, which is checkmate the other person, right? But when we take our confines out of the square blocks and put it into the real world, the strategy becomes muddled and blurred. Without actually properly defining your strategy, you don't know where you're heading towards. A very good example is the war that happened at Vietnam quite a few years ago, where the soldiers that went to Vietnam, invaded Vietnam, were there to win a game. They were trying to win the war, whereas the people in Vietnam were there to survive. So the strategy behind these two groups of people were completely different. Whereas the invaders constantly thought the war has ended, they have finished it. They celebrated in victory too soon. And right after that, they got ambushed again, and the war continued. So you can see that straight off the bat, there is two very distinct types of strategy, One is a long-term strategy and one is a short-term strategy. And often enough, there's a lot of companies that work on a short-term strategy because there's a lot more that you can report. There's a greater chance you can get promoted because you've reached a certain amount of numbers. But in the long-term strategy, that's what you actually want to go for. That is what you can actually succeed in. So when we talk about strategy, we're actually looking at the long-term strategy and not the short-term strategy. So yes, Sunzi is a very stable guy. He's very grounded and he was very wise. He thought through a lot of these things in finer detail. In this picture, it looks a bit rocky, but that's besides the point. So I'm going to move on to my next slide now, which in here, we look at the basics of designing product, which we need to get a whole elicitation of requirements from the clients, and then we put in some sort of design about the product. So what we thought is, in order for us to come up with decent amounts of requirements and solid requirements, we need to add the category of strategy in front of it. And this is looking at some specific things in order for us to classify the decision-making of why we came up with the requirements itself. Then in between the requirements, now that we know exactly what the clients want or the customers, we need to put tactics in between to see how can we achieve what we need to achieve as quick as we can. How can we solve the client's problem as best as we can? And so here you can see a good balance between the strategy and the tactics. We can see how it integrates nicely into the process. Okay, so in today's presentation, what you're going to walk away with is basically how to turn your ideas into reality. So yes, you might have a game-changing idea, but how do you actually implement that idea in the real world? Now, the downside about all of this is reality sometimes can be really harsh. So that in some way can change what you perceive as a good idea. Okay, so in order for us to actually accomplish turning this idea into reality, we need to look at three things, which is your product validation, your problem identification, and your strategic decision-making. Now, you might say, Bruce, why is the first one product validation? Isn't it supposed to be the other way around, where you start by thinking, what is the strategic decisions that you need to make, and then how do you actually define the problem before you actually validate the product? Yes, you're 100% correct. But what I like to say is, if you don't know how to validate your product, you don't know how to make proper decision-making. And therefore, we swapped it around to look at how do you actually validate whether you have a good product or not. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so looking at product validation, how do we actually validate that we have a good product? A lot of the times we can say, yeah, no, people would love this thing. But how do we know that? Okay, next. First thing we need to look at is the typical lean startup methodology that every startup practices. Now, this is some basic knowledge, so I'll go through it as quick as I can. The first thing is it's a cyclical design, meaning that this is a continuous process that happens throughout the startup. And in some point, it actually continues through large organizations as well. So we're looking at the learn, measure, and build. When we talk about learn, we're trying to understand what the market actually wants, what your customers actually want, and then we find a way to measure that, to see, okay, how do we quantify or qualify what they want? And from that, we build a product, we throw it out into the market again, and then we learn. And this is the process that we go through. Now, in the Lean Startup methodology, they talk about building a minimal viable product. This minimal viable product means the least amount of features that would give the most amount of value to your customers, just to see if they would enjoy that. Now, the difficult part comes when you say you're building an app that doesn't feel good, because is feeling good a necessity for a product? It's debatable. You're also talking about throwing a product out that doesn't have an ease of access of security and login features. Why can't I log in with my LinkedIn profile? Why can't I log in with my Google or Facebook, etc.? So now these things all come into play. There is arguably unlimited amounts of features that is required in our minimal viable product. So how can we decide what is the least amount of features that is required to throw it out into the market? Next. Okay, so again, how can we validate exactly how the market receives our product? How can we see whether they actually liked our product that we have thrown out into the market? So the first thing we need to look at is the diffusion of innovation theory. Let's take some basic statistics of a normal distribution and says this is the population of the world. And this is how people would end up adopting your product. Starting all the way on the left, we have the innovators. Innovators is the people who are ahead of the trend, where they would look at things that aren't on the market and they say, I want to give this a try. So these are the people where even if you have the strangest product in the world, where let's say an app that costs 2,000 euros and all it does is it plays some music when you click on it, or some app that would tell you it can take you to the moon. Okay, so these are very, very strange ideas, but innovators would give that a try. And if the innovators are onto something that is actually feasible and exciting, then we would have this section of people, which is called the early adopters. Those are the people that would follow on very quickly, looking at exactly what the innovators are adopting and seeing whether it's feasible. And that takes up 13.5% of your target audience. So only once you have reached this 16% of audience can you actually say you have an innovation. Why? Because the moment all of these people adopt your product, the next section of audience or your target audience would adopt your product as well, which is your early majority, and then followed by the late majority. So this means that because a large chunk of people are adopting your product, the rest of the audience would do that. So if you look at any sort of innovation that is out there that we can properly classify, there's a couple of years that this thing has been running, we can say for sure this is an innovation. They would have reached at least 16% of the target audience. So for example, Facebook, 8 billion users. 8 billion, and their target audience is 7.9 billion. 7.9 billion, so 80 million users. So from that, you can see there is a definite amount of users that is on the platform. So when we talk about this, if you are targeting the whole entire world, 7.9 billion users, people, where you say, no, my product is going to serve the whole world, everyone in the world is going to use it, you have to reach a real amount for your product to be considered an innovation. But some of our clients come to us and they say, well, Bruce, we have a credit card payment system. How can you not consider the whole world? Well, first of all, not everyone has a credit card, right? Not everyone pays with a credit card. Not everyone likes to pay with a credit card. What are the other payment options? Some people like to pay with their smartphone and not with their credit cards. So we reduce the amount of people quite significantly. So in order for us to have a greater chance of reaching this point of chasm, they call it, is to reduce your target audience, to be extremely more focused. Now, some of our clients come to us and they say, that's very clever, Bruce. We are going to target one client. And the moment we have one client, we have innovation. Yes, that is 100% correct. So if your client is a big organization that can feed you all the money and you can customize the product specifically for that organization and they will adopt it, you have an innovation. So the thing is, innovation itself can be ranging from very big scale to very small scale. Anything that has been done new is considered innovation. It's just whether that innovation is impactful or not. So if it's targeting the right audience, then this innovation works. And that's all you actually need to know. Okay, next. Okay, now we come to problem identification. So now that we know we need to reduce our audience, and now that we know we have an audience, what are the problems that they are facing? How do we know what they struggle with? How do we know what they actually want? And a lot of the times we've spoken to startups and they say they've done their research, they've spoken to their clients, they did the interviews, and at the end, their conclusion is they just want a to-do list. So they have all these fancy ideas to start off with. Yes, these type of functionalities would really help us to be more productive. And the discussion continues. And they realize, oh no, we just need a to-do list. It's just our traditional to-do list isn't exciting. That's it. So is there any space for innovation? Maybe. Do our clients know what they want? No. So the thing is, it's hard to know what our clients want if they don't know it themselves. So we need to understand exactly what do they want so that we can give that to them. Okay, so in order for us to actually understand what they want, we also need to start looking at the MVP itself, as I've mentioned earlier. The MVP itself consists of three separate quadrants, which is our desirability, our viability, and our feasibility. So desirability talks about what people actually want. That's what we spoke about now. And it also looks at the competitive advantage that you have to serve your audience compared to all the other competitors out there. Then we have viability, which is our business model. And your business model talks about how you're actually going to earn money from this product moving forward. And lastly is our feasibility, which is technical capabilities. So what technology is out there available for you to actually accomplish your startup? Sometimes the technology isn't out there, and that's why we need to work on the technology, and that's why it's considered a great innovation. For example, reaching the moon, reaching the Mars, that type of technology isn't fully developed, and that's why Tesla and Elon Musk is focusing a lot on developing that technology so that it can fit into this framework. And at the end of the day, the MVP remains very solidly the same. There is one focus about that project. Go to Mars. That's it. Nothing extra fancy, nothing about planting plants on Mars, nothing more than that. Just how can we get there? How can we get people there? And the rest is extra. The rest is, it needs to come, or else people will die when they get to Mars, but that is extra. And that is also space for other companies to come in, plug into their MVP and say, you know what, if you're focusing on getting to Mars, we'll focus on how to survive on Mars, and so on. So what is your MVP? Okay, then we are looking at a couple of frameworks on this, just click once, which in order for us to actually understand how to get to our desirability, we use frameworks such as the value proposition canvas, and of course the competitor analysis. See what is out there in the market and how do we differentiate ourselves with them. So then we have the pricing strategy for the viability. And pricing strategy talks about how do I package my product so that I can make money out of it. It's very clear once you understand how to actually do pricing strategy. But if you don't know how to do pricing strategy, it's always a big question. Bruce, I have this great product, but how do I make money out of it? How do I sell it? And this is a big concern a lot of our clients have. And it's not always very obvious. Later on, they would come up with a lot of different ideas about how they can make money. And then now they have too many options. So which one do we pick? Do we go with a subscription base? Do we go with a once-off? Do we go with an in-app currency? Do we go with selling ads on the platform? Which option do we take? There's so many. Okay, so we need to have a proper strategy in place to do pricing. Last one, technical feasibility. There's a lot of ways to look at this, and the first place I would always go to is the Gartner's hype cycle. Because usually the case, they would review the latest technology out in the market and place it onto the Gartner's hype cycle, and then you can see whether you can adopt it or not. So let's quickly run through some of these. Let me just check my time. Okay, next. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about this one. This is a basic fundamental framework for startups. If you guys would be interested, get in contact with me, then we can chat about this. Basically, on the right-hand side, we have the customer and the job that they need to go through, and the pain and the gains that they would experience while going through this. So let's talk about a payment platform. You're going to pay something, and sometimes your password doesn't work. Or you still have to always remember to bring your credit card with you. So that's the pain that they go through, and the gain is that they would be able to pay, and they would have a sense of security because this credit card isn't their actual hard cash that they might lose. Okay, so what about your product? This is where you plug into their product and say, okay, we can actually alleviate your stress. If you download our app, you can put your card in our app, and therefore if you forget your card at home, that's fine. Extra gain creators is that we can actually track your spending and let you know how your spending profile is going, right? So this is basic understanding of how this platform works. Of course, the example I gave is very trivial and is of millions of apps out there already, but it's just there for you to understand how this framework works. Thanks. Okay, then we talk about the pricing strategy. So again, we're only touching on these frameworks because of time constraints, but we're basically looking at 4 different focuses of your pricing. So are you trying to get more clients, in which we coin it acquisition? Are you trying to get more monetization, profitability, or market share? Okay, so if you have a lot of competitors, then you definitely go for market share. So when we look at this one, we focus specifically on the 3 alongside the focus that you have. Would you have more than one focus? Potentially. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, but because of time constraints, we will move on. Okay. Lastly, I want to talk about the Gartner's hype cycle. So the Gartner's hype cycle is mostly focusing on hype. When we talk about hype, we talk about how the industry is so excited about this particular technology. And each one of the technology itself is placed onto the chart. Now, this chart we can understand as when the innovation just comes out, nobody knows about it. At some point, the whole world will think it will change the world and realize that it can't actually change the world, and where it would go down to the trough. And slowly, as research goes into this product, it will reach a plateau of productivity, where new innovations will spring off from it, starting at a later stage. So, very basic example, a couple of years ago, we can see that Bitcoin has been on the low for a very long time, until at some point in time, people were like, oh wow, this is going to change the world. And then it crashed. So this front part itself can be considered a technical bubble, a technology bubble, or just an economic bubble in general, whichever product you are looking at. So some of the examples that are provided here is like explainable AI, responsible AI, composite AI, adaptive machine learning. So you can see that these are quite new and fresh ideas that you would be wondering, okay, what's that? So it's a good chance for us to research into what these things are and how they can fit into our product. Now, you might actually start looking at the bottom line, where if it's a white circle, this is less than 2 years before it reaches plateau of productivity. If it's a light blue one, then it's 2 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, and so on. So if we look at something like a digital twin, this is going to take 5 to 10 years before it reaches the plateau of productivity. So what is digital twin? Citizen twin. Let's talk a little bit about citizen twin. Citizen twin is taken from the concept of digital twin itself. So if we look at digital twin, that is creating an exact replica of yourself, and then that's considered digital twin. So the roadmap of digital twin also includes things like what happens if we do a surgery on this person? Will it actually turn out well later down the future? It's also taken into the construction industry, where we look at creating a replica of a architecture and drawing out all the possible lines of wires and piping and placements of the rooms to see which one would work out the best. And that's considered a digital twin. Now, when we talk about citizen twin, then we're looking at creating a citizenship on the internet, right? So if we look at identifying ourselves in this virtual world, how do we do that? And we can see in 2020, this citizen twin was almost reaching the plateau of productivity. But in order for it to actually realize its value, it still needs to take 5 to 10 years for any sort of viability to come out. Some blockchain functions are using this already to see what can we do to identify people on this blockchain so that we can have a better understanding and work with these people on the blockchain itself. So things like that would tie back to citizen twin. Now, there is one thing to keep in mind when we are looking at these different technologies that's out there, is it sounds cool and it's a good way to market your product, but does it always fit into your product? No, exactly. So when I was consulting one of our clients, he had a financial product, and he came to us and he was like, okay, can you guys add blockchain into our idea? And we say, but why? Why do you want that? What's the benefit behind this? There was no answer. So just because it's a great idea doesn't mean it needs to fit in your product. So think about it very carefully when you choose these things. All of the times people would come up on stage and present their startups, and they would throw in a couple of buzzwords. That's fine. But just make sure when you are actually implementing this, whether you need to have that or not. Okay. Yes. Okay. So let's look at some existing examples of MVP. Okay. So when we think about getting a ride, what is the first app that comes to our mind? Exactly, Uber. Okay. Okay, so that is the idea behind this concept. The first idea that you have before you even open the platform is your MVP. Okay? Let's look at another example. What about when you think about buying crypto? Exactly, Binance, yes. Crypto.com, yes. Okay. In South Africa, we have one that's called Luno. So this one specifically for Luno, this is my portfolio quite a few months ago. Now it's already over 80,000 rands. So if you convert that to euros, that's around 5,000 euros. So the moment you think about buying crypto, you think about an app like this. But you can see at the bottom, they have 5 sections. They have the home, the explore, the wallet, the rewards, the profile. So very evidently, you can already see that the explore is extra things that is redundant. It's not necessary for the product. Because I didn't think about what is the latest news on crypto to open this app. I didn't think about what is the world talking about. Because if I do that, I would rather just go to Google. What's the latest news on crypto? Okay, so the explore tab is already redundant. What about rewards? I didn't think about, okay, let me get rewards. That's why I'll open this app. No, we didn't. We thought about buying crypto. And therefore, your main focus is your home, your wallet, and profile, because that is necessary requirements. Okay, let's move on. So yes, some of you also thought about Binance. So as you can see, thus straight away, you're working in a market that is already flooded, right? So if you want to create another crypto exchange platform, you need to take this into consideration. If your customers are thinking, where can I buy crypto? And they can't think of your app because there's so many other options, you're going to have a tough time to sell your product, to differentiate yourself. Okay, next. So one of our clients also created a financial product, and on this platform he only has 2 pages. One to submit files to the company, the rest they do offline. They process the files, they do the financial books, and then send it back on the platform, and that's it. And that's sometimes really all you need for an MVP. Is there anything glamorous about this platform? Not at all. But when they think about doing your financial books, they will think about this client. Okay, very simple, straightforward. Sometimes the best ideas isn't the most complex ones. Okay, what about getting a date? What is the first app that comes to mind? Yes, Tinder. Yes, what else? Okay, Cupid, that's interesting. Okay, so you can see that there is a lot of apps out there that are trying to innovate on the idea of getting a date. But the first one that comes to mind is Tinder itself. So you can see that this is also a very flooded market. Okay, so this isn't my profile, by the way. It's just Tinder itself. I have a slightly different taste in ladies. Okay, next. So what about finding a direction? Hands off, yes. Google Maps. Nothing else? Okay, that's very interesting. Oh, there, Waze. Okay, so you can see that there is also a great emphasis about which app is the main focus in the market. And in this case, we can see that Google Maps trumps all of them because of how often we use it, because of how convenient it is, where we often forget what other products are out there. Okay, so yes, Google Maps, next. Okay, and once more. So what Google has done is they understand this concept so well that they've segmented all of their ideas into different packages. And with different packages, you'd learn about their different names. And you wouldn't end up using all of them. Imagine if you had a Google app that had all of these apps in one place. Wouldn't it be a mess? Just think about, for example, Gmail. And what is another complicated one? Gmail and YouTube. If you had to go into your email to watch videos, wouldn't that be complicated? Exactly. So it's a very good idea to segment your products into the purpose it serves. Okay, next. Okay. So now we're actually talking about the actual strategy. How do we make a decision about designing our product? Now that we understand, okay, we need this one idea behind the product itself, how do we actually carry it out? So the first thing we need to talk about is the golden circle. This is a typical framework that is used over and over again. But is it well implemented? I think that is a different topic. And that's why I want to discuss a little bit about how to use this framework as part of your startup. And this is designed by somebody called Simon Sinek. again, a popular philosopher, which is absolutely amazing. I don't think I'll ever say it as well as he does. But he says, companies that do great start with their why. And you can see straight away their one idea of their product aligns very well with their why. If you know exactly what people are going to think before opening your product, you would know what your why is, vice versa. So your why is a philosophical understanding of your existence. From a personal perspective, you can also do this chart for yourself. Why do I exist? What am I trying to achieve? Okay, what is my end goal? And similarly with a company as well. Why did we create the startup? And a lot of our clients say to me, Bruce, don't be silly, we just here to make money. Okay, that is not a good way to do it. What is your product doing? Why did you create this product? And it always starts with, we believe. I believe, however, but it's about your belief. So, given some examples, we believe that we can connect the world. Who are they? Facebook. How are they going to do it? We're going to use a platform that allows people to engage with each other and to add your mutual friends and only have your circle of trusted people view your details. Okay, so what would that be? That would be a website, now a mobile app, and we can see very clearly from the structure, if they have breached one of the three, we don't trust them anymore. So in their how, they showed a lot of sense of trust about how you can use this platform, how you can actually connect with people. And now, because of the data leakage and stuff like that, we have a bit of a wary side to us. They are doing a lot to try and change this, but messing up once is enough to make us consider whether they would mess up a second time. So what is your why? What is your company's why? Cool, let's move on. Now we take this golden circle framework and we flatten it out into a tree structure. And between the why and the how, we add stakeholders, which you will get something called an impact map. All the way on the left, we have goals. Who would carry out those goals? The impact that they should be creating, and then finally the deliverables. So the deliverables at the end of the day is your requirements. And here you can see a full scale about how you turn a philosophy into a product. Okay, so when we start with your goal should be exactly the same as your why in your golden circle. Then your stakeholders is everyone that participates in the product itself. So all the different types of users that would be on the product itself. If you have a payment platform, you would have the people swiping the cards, people receiving the payments of the swipes, and the administrators that manage the whole entire profile or the platform itself. Okay, so there's 3 types of users already on just one payment platform. People would think, oh, payment platform, just the person swiping. It's a common mistake. Why? Because the administrators and the people receiving the payments will also have some sort of impact, as well as technical deliverables that is required to carry out this product. Okay. So when we have those 3 types of people, then we can actually already see what role do they play on this platform itself. How are they receiving the payments? Is there a bank clearance process? Is there a reward system that's happening, etc.? How are they paying? Is it going through a third-party API, etc.? Okay. So from here, you can already see how these people are going to interact on the platform, and from that, you can define your list of requirements. And why we like to do this in a tree format is because the moment you think of a new idea, you can see the effects of how much extra work it requires, which is what we love. So let's move on to the next page. This is an example of a product that is out there, which we call Uber. We have a driver and a passenger. Of course, we missed out the administrator of the platform in totality. And first one, the driver needs to accept the passenger's request. So we also need to drive the passenger to the place, drop them off, review the passenger. So there's a lot more extra things that we haven't mentioned inside this because of the space that we have for presentation requirements. And then from that, we can see all the technical steps in between. How do we accept a request from a client? How do they show up on his screen? When do they show up? At what location do they show up? Etc., etc. So here we can see a good list of requirements. Okay. So I would actually like to reserve some time for you guys to attempt this yourself. And so let's move on to the next slide. So that is the end of our discussion today. And we do have a QR code on the next slide if you want to get in contact with me to chat more in detail about any of these things that I've presented today. And also just again, contact the TypeDev in totality. And you can also attempt to fill out these things yourselves and see how well you can accomplish these things in your mind. Okay. Is there any questions? No? Lovely. Thank you so much for listening in today, and hope we meet very soon.
Great, thank you so much, Bruce. And I see Bruce is here for questions. If anyone has any questions, you're welcome to pop them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and you can go ahead and ask Bruce directly. We've got a question so far from Mari, and she's asking about the graph by Gartner. And she said, how does one ensure that one's application is always relevant? She says she remembers nightclubs used to change their names in order to stay as the hotspot in town. So how is one able to do that with their own application or software? Over to you, Bruce.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the question. I think this is an extremely relevant question, especially in our industry today. And the answer, yeah, we can definitely see it not just in the nightclubs, but also in the tech industry, where they would change the names of certain functionalities inside an organization just to make it sound more fancy and in a slightly different way. So that is definitely quite a common practice. Even with artificial intelligence itself, a lot of the times there is a lot of basic functionality that is built into the system, and they would just consider that as artificial intelligence. So to some extent, it is possible to rename your products and functions just according to the latest buzzword out there in the industry. However, there is some places where it's not possible to do that. And I think that is the real question that you're trying to ask. How do we make sure that we actually have the latest technology or the most relevant products out there in the industry? And the answer is you can't really always do that. And it's also not always so necessary to do that. So we know that that location-based technology has been out there for a very long time, but up till now, it's still quite a big feature for innovation. So there is still a lot more new products that are coming out into the market, utilizing this function, this extra coded feature in their products. So it's not as if you have to always have the most latest feature or technology in order for your platform to actually do a very good job. I think at the end of the day, if your product can serve a good value to your clients, whoever your target audience is, then that is the most important thing. So even if you don't have the latest Citizen twin or whatever it is, the newest machine learning or whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. But if you are the type to say, you know what, I actually want to start with one of these technologies to see where can I actually implement such a thing to make sure I have a good amount of years to work on this product. And when I release it, I know that people would really love this. Then you can go to the Gartner's hype cycle and look exactly how long these things would take to get to the market. So if we look at maybe Citizen Twin, it would take 5 to 10 years to reach the plateau of productivity. That means in 5 to 10 years, the industry would actually adopt Citizen Twin as a common practice and start using that technology. So you have 5 to 10 years to make use of Citizen Twin in your product and make sure that your product actually serves a value with Citizen Twin itself. So, I mean, there's also a lot that you can consider on the chart itself. So don't try and force yourself to pick all of them, or don't force yourself to try and pick one of them. As long as your product serves value, it's not necessary that you have to have the latest technology. Hope that answers your question. Sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry, yes, yes, so she's just popped a message in the chat there and says, yes, it does. And says, thank you, Bruce. Has anyone else got a question? You're welcome to raise your hand or pop it in the chat. Patrick is asking if you can just shed more light on the details of the last part of the presentation. It says, which is the what?
Okay, awesome. I think the what and the how is very straightforward and simple for anyone to actually understand. So generally, when you have a product, you know exactly what your product is. So if you have a SIM card, you tell people this is called a SIM card, and you tell them what it does and how it works. So straight away, you have your what and your how. So if you have your product that you have in mind, normally the presentations that happen on stage talk a lot about what their product is and how their product works. Of course, if you are on stage, you'd focus on presenting more of the core of your product, whereas the what in the impact map actually outlines everything about the what. So if it has a certain amount of user permissions, certain amounts of security encryptions, and so on and so forth. So that is more about the what. If we're looking at the golden circle itself, then the what is definitely the core of your product, what it actually does. So if we look at the what of Uber, it's a mobile app that uses location-based technology to connect a driver with a passenger that's looking for a driver right on the spot. Yes, so even with that, we know that Uber has a lot more other functions. So I just want to quickly emphasize on this point. Uber has a lot more functions. You can add your family, you can add your whole entire organization, you can get tax deductions with it, you can schedule drives into the future, you can book a cab for somebody on the other side of the world, and so on and so forth. But people don't normally use these things. People normally just use it when they're walking out on the street and they say, I need a cab now. So it's the same with your product. Yes, it could have tons of other features surrounding it, but what is the main focus? What do you want people to think of to open your app? And a lot of times startups fail to define that properly because they say, Bruce, I have 6 really cool features on this platform. Then I got bad news for you. Your 6 features is too much. You need to focus on one thing that makes them think, okay, this is why I'm opening this app or website.
Perfect, Bruce. Okay, we just have one more question here from Chanel, and she's asking, what is the best way of creating an impactful feedback loop to ensure that you're building a product and innovating for your target customer?
I think that the best thing to do is always to throw it out there and see how they react to it from your own personal observations. And I know some startups find this really difficult because they always have this extremely good idea in mind and they don't want to really share it with the world. So the moment you start finding people that you are comfortable sharing this with, then start doing it. Even if that means that you have to write some sort of NDA, sign some sort of agreement just to discuss it. But most of the case, if you have a good business, you don't need to write NDA. If you have the capabilities to carry out the business, of course. So the more feedback you get from the people who are going to adopt your product, the better. When I was in university, I created a timetable software. And throughout my progress of developing this product, I went to my friends and said, hey, check this out. What do you think? And they would give me feedback. They would tell me what features they actually looking for in this product, and so on. So we originally built it as a manual tool where you have to pick your own on the platform itself. And one of my friends told me, it would work a lot better if I can just click one button and it gives me all the options. And that advice itself became the core of our product, where people downloaded our product just to click that one button to get all the options instead of building their timetable themselves. So it's very important to get your actual users' feedback. What did they enjoy about it, and watch them use it itself. Hope that answers your question.
Great, I think it does. Okay, I've got one more question here. To our Facebook audience, if you've got any questions as well for Bruce, please put them, just comment down below. And we'll also just share those with Bruce quickly. We've just got a few minutes left. Got the very last question I have from Nathan. And his question is, does it mean you have to look into vulnerabilities of your competitors and use them to an advantage by improving on them in your application, and then use them when advertising?
That's definitely a option to go. There's a lot of things that comes into play when we talk about developing a product and making it successful. When I was creating my timetable program, there was 6 or 7 other competitors that were doing exactly the same thing. The only difference is that I networked with the right people to get it launched onto ClickUp, which was our learning management website. And we weren't the best product. We got a lot of hate emails afterwards to say that we stole their projects, and it was the first time we ever heard about them. And they really did show us how amazing their product was compared to ours, but ours was the chosen one at the time. So at some point, we need to understand that the market is the market and your product is your product. So you don't always have to differentiate yourself. You need to win over your audience. It's like Facebook as well. When Facebook came out, there were already quite a few other social media platforms out there in the industry, but they focused on what the people wanted and how to broadcast their product across the world. So they actually only started with a profile page, accepting friends, and also a relationship status, and that's it. So with that in mind, it's a very, very, very simple product, but their distribution channel was really good. So the whole entire university that Mark Zuckerberg studied at adopted this product because they loved it so much. And we know with social media platforms, it's a lot about the network effect on your product that gets people to use it. So it's simply because your friends are on the same platform, that's why you use it. If we think about Telegram and WhatsApp, people use WhatsApp more, even though Telegram is a lot safer, it's a lot smoother, the backup process is easier, sending messages is quicker. We don't care. Our friends are on WhatsApp, so we're going to use WhatsApp. So there is a lot of strategies behind expanding your business, if we can say it that way.
Thanks, Bruce. Okay, very last one, I promise. And this one's from Malcolm, who's watching us from Facebook. And his question is, so he says that you mentioned that problem solving was the second step. Why is it not the first step in product development?
Okay, so it's very important to understand the concept of product validation before we go into the problem identification. And the reason for that is because you need to first understand exactly what you're trying to achieve. What are you trying to measure before you can actually identify the problems and so on and so forth. So if you don't know what you're trying to measure and how you're going to validate all of this, even if you do identify the problem, you're going to forget that you need to measure this. You're going to forget that you need to actually validate your product at some point in time. So it's really easy to understand how you're going to validate your product. It's just really just discussing it and understanding exactly what to do, and then you can move on. So that's a very small step, but it's a very crucial step in the process.
I'm muted. Great. Thank you so much, Bruce. And that is our time there. So thank you so much, Bruce, for an amazing presentation. I think there's definitely a lot to learn there, and definitely a lot to think about while we all are at different stages, if it's developing our product or kind of further innovating the current products that we have already. So thank you so much for joining us and for taking your time for being with us. I know that there's been queries about how to contact you, how to get in touch if if we need any help with, developing products or anything. So we will share those details with you, and I think we'll put it in the chat as well. So please stick around. And also, we want to have your feedback as part of the Tech Tribe community. Let us know what you think about the session. Was it helpful for you? Was it useful? What did you think? And also then, so there's a survey link in the chat. So please just click on this, just a few questions. Let us know what you think. And also let us know what sort of topics and content you also want to see within the Tech Tribe community so that we can help you. Our aim here and our focus really to help you, the entrepreneur, to help you grow your business further. So let us know what else, what other content you would like to see from us. But from myself and on behalf of the Tech Tribe community, thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful day. And once again, thank you, Bruce, for joining us this morning. Have a good day.
Thank you so much for having me.